Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's live Q&A with Michael Hampton. Before we start, I'd like to go over a couple points. First off, for all those in attendance, make sure to start entering your questions now so that we can get the queue going and pretty much have the questions ready for Michael to answer. Also, for those who have more than one question, you can ask more than one question. Just make sure you give other people a chance to ask theirs as well. And please let us know if you have a microphone or not, so that way we can allow you to speak to him directly if you do. But beyond that, I'm going to pass control over to Michael. So Michael, whenever you're ready, you can basically begin.
Okay. Hi, everyone. First of all, I wanted to thank everyone for taking the time to watch the workshop. I hope that it was a little bit helpful for some of you guys. And I guess I owe you also a brief intro, mainly due to the fact that I think that my background is pretty substantially different than some of the other people that may have presented through this forum, in that it's not incredibly industry heavy. My background may be similar in some of the education. I went to Art Center, College of Design, which some of you may know as concept design kind of focused or oriented school now. When I went, it was in more of a transitional period from what was editorial illustration at the time into kind of where it is now, the more concept design or concept heavy classes or techniques. And I think that what that gave me that may be a little bit different is a much more kind of, not that this is any better or worse, but broad approach, in that I had a lot of time in different departments. So it wasn't just an isolated illustration background. I spent a lot of time in the fine art department and in the academic department. And so I did a little bit of freelance while I was in Art Center, but almost immediately after I went right into graduate school. Where I went was Claremont Graduate School. It's also in California, one of the older colleges in private colleges in California area, Southern California. And there I studied fine arts and painting with an emphasis on kind of theory and abstraction, which is something that I think that the figure really helped me with, the study of the figure, and also something historically that I see the figure setting up a lot of artists for. And I do practice that now. I think my main role in industry as far as movie or animation is really an educational position. And now, again, I love teaching in that it affords me a lot of time to continually educate myself. And now I'm doing another master's, working towards a PhD in art history. So that's really the short of my background. A couple years ago, I self-published the figure drawing design and invention book. It was initially just meant to be something to help my students in class. So I did put up the leftovers on Amazon and have sold a few of them that way outside of my students directly. But it was initially conceived as something that would be used in a classroom and would be paired with my lectures so that it would have the reinforcement of what was said with the diagrams and the practical application. And that is now on its third edition, and every time I make a new edition, I always make sure that I update stuff. I'm constantly learning, constantly unhappy with some of the things that are in there, so I try to make a point of always trying to improve it, as there's a great deal of imperfection in it still. So it's that kind of constant process of learning and self-correcting. But that's it. That's what I've got for an intro.
No problem. Thank you, Michael. Our first question is from Todd. He says, "Hello, Michael. Great lessons. Do you have a fast shorthand for the figure to block them into your scenes at the right scale and shape while you're just getting the vibe of the scenes so you don't lose the feeling with anatomy? And can you show us what that might be? Thank you."
Well, I would use exactly what I use in the demonstration anytime I'm trying to relate a figure to a scene, and unfortunately I'm having some Photoshop/Wacom tablet problems, or else I would do that. But one of the things really important for me is composition, and that's something that I think is more interesting as a subject and area of study than just the figure per se. I think of the figure more as just kind of a single vehicle that offers compositional problematics. And so one thing that I especially like about the gesture, or the way that I work through the lay-in of the figure, is that it allows for integration into any type of thematic compositional setup. And again, what I mean by that is the kind of emphasis on the abstract linear lay-in of the figure, I think, is something that really allows for a departure into assimilation into a scene, whether it be that you're extending those rhythms into composition lines that you have set up, or that the story and dynamic of the figure allows you to create a repetition of theme into existing compositional elements and scene around it. As far as scale goes, again, as I have noted in the lecture, I'm probably notorious for being a bad practitioner of proportions. It's something that I kind of just, out of all of my tools, have spent the least amount of time developing. And so for me, it's always just kind of sight and the feel of the scene and what would look correct. But again, it's really for me that abstract implication of the figure as it's laid in and how I can and use that as a departure point into a scene.
Thank you, Michael. And Todd, I wasn't sure if you had a mic or not, so I apologize if you did. If you have another question, I guess you can ask it, and I'm going to give you a chance to talk to him. But if not, then it worked out perfectly fine. Our next question is from Chris, and Chris asks, how do you approach your initial gesture when there is extreme twisting / bending of the figure, or extreme foreshortening?
Really the same way. I mean, for the gesture, I think you can still approach the figure in the exact same way. I mean, it's really not that spatial specific as far as the way that the figure is understood. The gesture lines still are just enacting some type of rhythmic passageway through the form, be it standing or foreshortened. But that being said, I always also employ multiple styles of drawing. I don't think you should have just one approach to drawing. If I see a pose that suggests a level of difficulty or just a type of position that suggests a different approach, that's something that I would absolutely consider doing. If something is severely foreshortened, I may tend to take the approach that is more shape-to-shape or a part-to-part method, which might require that I slow down a bit and make more of a study of where things are lining up, especially in foreshortened where the figure is thrown into a tremendous amount of abstraction. It just may be a better solution. So the approach that I kind of went through is more the mechanics of invention, but that being said, it should just be one tool in your belt or arsenal of ways to approach the figure.
Awesome, Michael. Our next question is from Arthur. He says, hey, Michael, thanks for putting all together your book. Any tips on how to render the figure after tightening up all the proportion, anatomy, and muscle skeleton? Thanks in advance.
Sure. The rendering is also something that I think is maybe a different technique. Like I said, the ability to have multiple approaches is going to really service all of you. And I think for rendering, it's just that thing. I do touch upon it a little bit in the back of the book, but it's hardly serviced for the 2 or 3 pages that it gets. I generally base my understanding of rendering on the form beneath. So I think you can't get away with rendering something out without having that construction or that initial foundation built in. And then I'll approach it generally from the position of tonal mapping. One of the schools I attended before Art Center was Associates in Art, and that was a pretty dominant method of drawing there, kind of an old illustrator method of laying out the figure, separating it into lighter dark patterns. And that's something that I generally do. When I have all my construction and forms set up, I do work down the figure from head to foot, mapping out the different light and shadow shapes. I work from the core shadow as it's probably going to be the darkest place and easiest to see an area of transition or form turn. And from that core shadow, I develop 4 edges, which are timing the experience of the viewer's progress around that form. And I associate those 4 edges to either a sphere, cylinder, box, or cast shadow edge.